Earlier today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced some good news that would have been unthinkable during the Biden administration. The news: illegal immigration at the southern border was down, are you ready for this? 94% from this March to last March. As one unnamed DHS source told the New York Post, these illegals are scared. There are consequences now. What does this say? It says that if you want to do something, you can do something. This whole thing that what we saw for 4 years at the southern border was by design. Joining me now to talk more about this, Senator John Cornyn from the great state of Texas. Senator Cornyn is a member of the Judiciary Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Cornyn, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tony.
So this is big news, and it does reveal that if there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely. We didn't need to pass any more laws. We just needed a president who would enforce the law. And that's exactly what President Trump has done. And as you point out in your introduction, you talked about consequences. That's one of the things that the Border Patrol would always tell me during the Biden administration was lacking. There were no consequences to coming to the country outside of legal channels. And also, I would say that we're seeing some deterrence. That is, people who know that they're not going to be allowed into the country absent a legally valid claim aren't coming. And that's had a dramatic impact.
Now, Senator, the president has been citing the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 as his legal backing to deport dangerous gang members like MS-13. In fact, I think it was Sunday night, he sent another 17 people identified as violent criminals to El Salvador. But if I'm not mistaken, there are some on the other side of the aisle, Democratic members of the Senate, that are trying to take that authority away from the president to crack down on what has been happening at our southern border.
It's hard to imagine because if there's people who certainly we do not want in the United States, it's hardened criminals, and particularly those under final orders of deportation. There've been roughly 1.5 million, maybe more, immigrants who are in the country who have had final orders of deportation, but the Biden administration simply refused to send them back home. That's changing now, but certainly the Biden administration and Tom Homan, the head of ICE, is focusing on the worst of the worst, and that's who you're talking about here.
Have you seen a noticeable difference in Texas? I mean, Texas is a border state. I mean, this is where a lot of these folks are coming across. Have you seen a noticeable difference in Texas?
Absolutely. It's been dramatic. And of course, to your point, it has been the border of Texas, 1,200 miles of common border with Mexico, that has borne the burden, the principal responsibility to deal with what is actually a federal government responsibility. Governor Abbott and Texas leadership have had to step up and fill the gap and to do the federal government's job because the Biden administration refused to do so. But now, as a result of the enforcement efforts of President Trump and his administration and the continued efforts of the Texas leadership, we're seeing the kind of dramatic decreases in immigration that you've mentioned.
All right, I need to ask you this question, Senator Cornyn, because as you've laid out, this was President Trump taking the authority that he had and looking for the authority under the Constitution and federal law. But Joe Biden had that same authority. He just didn't use it. He didn't want to use it. What can Congress do that would ensure that that southern border remains secure, regardless of who's in the White House?
Well, the first thing we can do is provide the funds that Tom Homan needs, the border czar, and this administration to provide for detention facilities and for additional personnel. Because you can imagine this is a very labor-intensive job, identifying these immigrants who are illegally in the country and then detaining them and then sending them back to their home country. But we need to, in order to actually make this permanent, we may need to consider additional legislation. Most of this is occurring under under an executive order, which would expire at the end of President Trump's term. And in fact, that's what happened the first time, is all the executive orders that President Trump put in place, President Biden withdrew all those,
right,
and that's created the open border. So I guess more than anything, Tony, that what we need to do is to elect presidents who take their job in enforcing the law seriously, because we didn't have that under Joe Biden.
Just about 30 seconds left. But if you did have the law and a president did not enforce the law, could not Congress then take action against that president for not enforcing the law?
It would be extraordinary, but I think warranted when we have the sort of
invasion
of humanity coming in. And so there are things we could do. For example, impeachment is something that's provided in the Constitution if presidents aren't doing their job.
Right, right. Senator John Cornyn, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today on Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony.